most people believe Iran is a bad actor. They've been a bad actor for 47 years. If we defang them and we bring some stability to the Middle East and the world by this action, I think over time the American people will think it was a good decision.
LOL. Sorry.
I'm sorry, what does that mean?
I know it's not your age group, but laugh out loud.
Is that a serious response to a serious answer?
It is a serious response.
Why?
To what
are those not worthy objectives?
Can I finish? What wasn't a serious answer, which is this. The last thing that has been brought is stability to the Middle East. What we have seen, in fact, is a chaotic incursion, misadventure into Iran, which has led the entire region to be inflamed with no end in sight.
In today's video, Lulu-Garcia-Navarro absolutely humiliates Scott Jennings for defending Trump on CNN. This debate gets tense right away because it comes down to one big question. Does anyone actually know what the plan is? Lulu's side hits harder when you look at the numbers. When most Americans don't support the military action and are against sending troops, that usually means something's missing. Clarity. And historically, when the goals of a conflict aren't clearly defined, public support drops fast. But before we dive into today's video, make sure to subscribe if you want to see more videos like this one.
Breaking news that we are following tonight, President Trump is now just hours away from addressing the nation about this ongoing war with Iran. Ahead of the speech, we have new CNN polling that is debuting right now, showing how the country feels about this war. Now, just a third of Americans approve of how the president is handling his role of commander-in-chief as well as the war. 2/3 disapprove of the decision to take military action in Iran, and strong opposition has grown 12 points since the start of the war. 63% of Americans say that they believe it's likely that the war will turn into a long-term military conflict, and nearly 7 in 10 oppose sending U.S. ground troops into Iran. That is something that the president and the administration have repeatedly refused to rule out. 71% say they don't want Congress to authorize $200 billion for further military action in Iran. A lot to take in there. My panel is here with us in the arena. CNN political commentator and host of the Off the Cuff podcast, SE Cup, CNN contributor and New York Times journalist Lulu-Garcia-Navarro, and former Democratic Congressman Max Rose, and CNN senior political commentator Scott Jennings. This poll is a lot of bad news for President Trump in terms of how the American people view this war. And it's also, I think it shows that the president tonight is speaking maybe a little too late. Americans have calcified how they view this war, and in fact, it's getting worse for him.
I think that, what's largely believed to be happening tonight is President Trump is going to use this opportunity to pressure NATO to help us out more, right? Where's our speech? Where's the speech to the American public? We are more than a month into this war now, telling us what the mission is, what the plan is, why we're there in the first place. He never did that. And he talks a lot about this war, but he's talking to external audiences. When he talks, you can hear him, he's talking to the markets, right? Or maybe he's talking to project strength to our allies around the world and our enemies around the world. It sounds like a lot of propaganda. It's not really speaking to us.
When you look at U.S. history, public support for military action usually depends on one thing: clear objectives. Early in conflicts like the Gulf War, support was high because people understood the mission. But in Iraq and Afghanistan, once the goals started shifting and the timeline became unclear, support dropped, and it dropped fast. That's exactly what these poll numbers are starting to look like. And the concern about this turning into a long-term conflict isn't random either. Analysts have pointed out that conflicts involving Iran are rarely short or contained. Iran doesn't just respond directly, it uses regional proxies and indirect tactics, which makes escalation harder to control and easier to drag out. That's why even the Pentagon has historically been cautious about full-scale engagement there. There's also the communication issue Abby is getting at. In past wars, even when details were classified, presidents still made a clear case to the American people early on. Think about how quickly addresses were made after major decisions in previous administrations. Waiting weeks into a conflict before clearly explaining the mission creates a vacuum, and that vacuum gets filled with uncertainty and skepticism. And then there's the economic side, which people feel immediately. Tensions involving Iran almost always impact global oil markets, especially around the Strait of Hormuz. Even small disruptions can drive up fuel costs, which then affect everything from groceries to transportation. So when Americans are being asked to support a conflict while also feeling those financial pressures, they're naturally going to want answers. So the bigger point here is that this isn't just about whether the strategy is right or wrong. It's about whether there's a clear, consistent explanation behind it, because without that, even justified actions start to lose public support.
And so it doesn't sound like he cares that 70% of the American people don't want boots on the ground. It doesn't sound like he cares what public sentiment is over this war. Now, that is his right to not care and do what he wants. But I've never heard of a worse choice to make in an election year.
And look, I mean, I think the American people understand that Iran is a bad actor, Scott, but the president has clearly not made the case to them that this particular action was necessary and warranted in this moment.
Well, the reality is we're in it. And sort of the polling is somewhat irrelevant right now because we're already a month in, and the president needs to tell the country tonight, and I expect he will tell the country tonight how he intends to wrap up large-scale military operations and what he foresees beyond that. And I think ultimately, if we end this conflict having met clear objectives, they're not going to have nuclear weapons, they're not going to have missiles, they're not going to have an aggressive Navy, and they're not going to be an exporter of terrorism, and we don't wind up in some prolonged conflict, and we do wind up in a situation where the other Gulf states and Israel are principally responsible for monitoring Iran over time, I think the American people will have judged that to be a good outcome. I agree with you. Most people believe Iran is a bad actor. They've been a bad actor for 47 years. If we defang them and we bring some stability to the Middle East and the world by this action, I think over time the American people will think it was a good decision.
LOL. Sorry.
I'm sorry, what does that mean?
I know it's not your age group, but laugh out loud.
Is that a serious response to a serious answer?
It is a serious response.
Why?
To what
are those not worthy objectives?
Can I finish? What wasn't a serious answer, which is this. The last thing that has been brought is stability to the Middle East. What we have seen, in fact, is a chaotic incursion, misadventure into Iran, which has led the entire region to be inflamed with no end in sight, with the president actually now changing the goalposts, saying that, well, we're just going to cut and run and let the Straits of Hormuz be sorted out by somebody else. Listen, every single president had in their binder war games, knowing that this was going to be the end result if you did what you did.
Now, historically, even controversial wars start with at least some level of public support when leaders clearly explain the mission. But here, you've got around 70% of Americans already against sending troops just weeks in. That's a major red flag. It usually means people don't feel like they've been given a clear reason or a clear end goal, and that matters more than people think. Studies from institutions like the Rand Corporation have shown that when wars lack public backing early on, they become much harder to sustain politically and strategically. It limits what leaders can realistically do, especially in an election year where every decision gets amplified. Then there's the stability argument, which sounds good on paper, but history tells a different story. Look at Iraq after 2003 or Libya after 2011. In both cases, military action removed immediate threats, but without a clear long-term plan, it created power vacuums that led to more instability, not less. Even US defense officials have admitted that unclear objectives and shifting goals tend to drag conflicts out instead of resolving them, and you're already seeing signs of that uncertainty here. When the messaging keeps changing from strong action to winding things down, it makes people question whether there was ever a consistent strategy to begin with. That kind of inconsistency doesn't just affect public trust, it affects how allies and adversaries respond too. There's also the economic side, which hits immediately. Any tension involving Iran raises concerns around the Strait of Hormuz, where roughly 20% of the world's oil supply moves through. Even the possibility of disruption can push prices up, and that trickles down fast. Gas, transportation, groceries. So when Americans are feeling that pressure without understanding the long-term benefit, it adds to the skepticism.
President Trump chose to do this, and now he's changing what the metrics of success are. This is a disaster for the region, and it has been a disaster for the American people because they have had to pay for this war.
LMAO. That's my response to that. We take away their missiles, we take away their Navy, we take away their Air Force, and we take away their capability of getting nuclear weapons. They have missiles that can reach most of Europe. And if you want to leave them in place to do all that for another 47 years, that's a choice. That's a choice.
Still in place,
these things I just listed are not in place. They are not in place.
Look, I think it's important. It's really an open question on the nukes and on the ability to export terror. Do we have any evidence that this operation has prevented Iran from ever doing that again?
Well, look, I don't have any acronyms, but here's what I do know is that proper actions by a commander-in-chief align tactics, operations, and strategy, and they associate them with an outcome. Now, the problem is here is, of course, this war was started without any clear goal in sight. One day it was terrorism, one day it was missiles, one day it was nuclear weapons. No one knew what was going on. One day it was regime change.
Can I just point out that the 4 points that Scott mentioned, which the White House reiterated today, are the different 4 points than what Marco Rubio said 3 days ago. 3 days ago.
Well,
so they've, just in the last week, they have switched what 4 points were the objectives of this war.
And of course, but let's even just take the 4 points that Scott laid out, and let's say
Lulu and Max's side hits harder when you look at how modern conflicts are actually supposed to be run. In military doctrine, success isn't just about taking out capabilities. It's about aligning tactics with a clear political end goal. That's something even the Pentagon has emphasized for years. When those objectives keep shifting from nuclear threats to terrorism to regime pressure, it becomes harder to measure what winning even looks like. And that's not just theory. We've seen this play out before. In Iraq, the initial objective was weapons of mass destruction. Then it shifted to democracy building, then counterinsurgency. Each shift made the conflict longer and more complicated. Same thing in Afghanistan. Once the mission expanded beyond its original scope, it became nearly impossible to define a clear endpoint. That's exactly the kind of pattern people are starting to recognize here. There's also the question of whether these actions actually achieve what they're supposed to. Intelligence experts have pointed out that military strikes alone rarely eliminate nuclear capability long term. They can delay it, but not erase the knowledge or infrastructure completely. That's why past strategies relied heavily on inspections and agreements, not just force. And on the regional side, conflicts involving Iran almost never stay contained. Iran's influence isn't just within its borders. It operates through proxy groups across the region. So even if certain capabilities are degraded directly, the broader network can still respond indirectly, which is why these situations often escalate rather than resolve cleanly. Then there's the cost factor. Wars like this don't just stay overseas, they show up at home. Rising oil prices, inflation pressures, and increased military spending all hit everyday Americans. Historically, prolonged conflicts have cost trillions of dollars over time, and people are much more aware of that now than they were 20 years ago.